I disagree.
I disagree.
You don't have the right to my opinion.
I'm just trying to save the world, man.
I don't know, maybe.
It's legit.
Can I finish?
Can't fit. Hold on. Fine.
And now, disagree to disagree.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Disagree to Disagree. Once again, I'm Jason, and this is also Jason.
Wow, there's two of you now on the show. I like this.
Yep. You lost the election, and you're apparently your seat.
Oh, okay. I guess that's how it works, even on Disagree to Disagree. It's great to see you.
It is great to see you. It was like you were just here.
It feels like it.
The sun is shining. It's 70 degrees in November.
Unseasonably warm for this time of year in this part of the country.
Yeah, we're sitting here in shorts and t-shirts feeling pretty relaxed.
I love it.
Yeah. This week's episode of Disagree to Disagree is brought to you by good old American Freedom. Still just $1.05.
What a wonderful sponsor. I can't believe it costs that much.
I can't believe it doesn't cost more.
I would have said cheaper, but whatever. Don't forget to check us out on social media at the D2D Podcast. 2 is numerical. That's on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at the D2D Podcast. 2 is numerical.
And you can download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Apple, Spotify, Google, whatever the other 26 are. It's there. And we love to hear your comments. We love to get new subscribers. We love it when you share. This little community that we have started to engage with has just been fantastic.
Yes, please keep doing it. Share, retweet, like, and subscribe. We appreciate you guys. Thank you.
And after last week's civics lesson with binders of information, I think this week we're going to
Still waiting for that test to be graded, Jason.
Yeah, we're going to take it a little easier this week, at least intellectually speaking. We'll just let the raw nerve emotions speak. I don't know.
Oh, no, not that. We're not going to do that.
What are we talking about this week, though, Brett?
This week, coming up to what everything has been happening throughout the whole year, I think it's a good point to just maybe take a step back and see how things went on election night and kind of where the state of things are, and then get into the meat bet.
We don't so much have a topic as we're just going to talk about what happened this past week.
And pretty much just a reaction from election night, where things are right now. I don't know how far in prognosticating we're going to get, but maybe we'll touch on that. And then to close out the show, we're going to talk about the meat bet.
I think people want to hear about the meat bet up front. I
Wow.
mean, I think most people are waiting with bated breath
Nope, it's a teaser.
to hear about
You
the meat.
get to hear about
the
it at
meat
the end
bet.
of the show.
All right. Well, I will hold my powder on the meat bet then if you want to save it as a teaser, but I would like to lead with it. Anyway, so yeah, we're just going to talk about this week and how it's felt on both sides of the political fence, and just kind of talk about a few issues that we feel are germane.
Polling was one of the first things that you and I talked about, and it was sort of the expectations versus the reality of it. What's your assessment of polling and what the results ended up being on election night?
Well, let me just start by saying Nate Silver is dead to me.
Wow.
No, I think polling is broken. I think there's been a couple of cycles in a row where, maybe in 2016 you could say it was within the margin of error. But this time around, the national polling aggregate on voting day from 538 had Biden +8. He's going to win maybe +3,
At best.
but
Yeah.
that's 5
And there were states where
points. And there's a 5-point spread in Florida and in a lot of these states where I don't know. Do you think that it is a Trump specific problem, the shy Trump voter? Or do you think that it is polling itself and the methodology?
Yeah, polling really got egg on its face again, and it's been a really contentious issue on the news cycles as of recently. I've said it before on this show that there is a segment of people who were voting for Trump, who did vote for Trump, that just won't admit it in traditional polling practices. And I believe that has sort of come to fruition at this point. Polling has sort of hit a mark. I think it also has to do with the age of the internet and online presence is much more affected in the minds of society as a whole. But I think there is also something to be said about why people won't admit to the polls that they're voting for a particular candidate. And it's a reality. It really is. I mean, there are states that double digits that they had projections for Biden by, single digits, but it was all very significant, solid win. And it just didn't pan out that way. And folks like you said, Nate Silver at 538.com. But I think it's just a combination of a lot of things, of social media being more prevalent in society, Trump himself, personality versus the politician, and at the same time, the distrust that a percentage of the population has with the media and sort of responding to them about their political beliefs.
Well, I'm wondering if it's a Trump thing or if it's a polling thing, because when I go back and I look, the numbers that people say they're going to vote for Biden, it's much closer. Like Biden's number that he polls at is much closer to where he ends up. Trump's is routinely 5 points under. And it seems to be a Trump phenomenon. I don't remember polling being this far off. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if it isn't just this candidate and his unique personality that some people, you're right. I think there's just a group of people who do not want to admit that they're Trump voters, but they're there. And the question is, are they going to be there going forward? And are we going to have to build into the methodologies the fact that X amount of this population probably won't answer? So we try to bake in some sort of counterweight to that in our models. I don't know. I would hate to be a pollster right now.
Oof.
But I do think what ultimately we found out is that this is a nation that is straight up divided. If anybody thinks the other side is going away or that they have a clear majority,
Polling practices traditionally, in my mind's eye, has always been a shade suspect to begin with. So I'm not super surprised by this. So while you're looking for a clear answer, I don't know if there's a lot of evidence right now to kind of break it down as a white paper and fully explain as to this is why it happens. 2 + 2 is 4. I think there's just a lot of factors and assumptions that everybody can make and that I'm going to make and that you're going to make. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think the reality is it's influenced by all those things. And pollsters, I've said it before, they didn't get their act from 2016 figured out going into this. I said it previously, and I don't know what adjustments they're going to make. The gentleman from the Trafalgar Group, I believe it's how it's pronounced, he was the closest out of all of them. And he was being accused of sort of being a Trump stooge almost. And he ended up being closer and more right than anybody else. I don't understand the particular machinations of what the methodology is of how they pick people and what their questionnaire process or how they get their phone number to begin with and their name. So I'm hoping that these folks can go back and sort of reevaluate, reassess, figure it out who did what right and how they can improve on that. Because there's some people that have made a claim that by having these polls be as exasperated as they are, you keep a certain segment of people being like, well, there's no reason to vote. This guy's going to blow out and win. Or even an influence another way, try to make it seem like, oh, you got to get out to vote because they're telling us that this guy's going to. So I don't want polls to influence voters as to vote or not to vote. I think you should regardless of that. But there are people who get influenced by a lot of different things, and that could be one of them. And it just sort of makes it aggravating for people who pay attention to this stuff. And you get these disproportionate numbers. And while you're going through these 4-year cycles or even the year of the election itself, you rely on this stuff to give you information and to get an idea of where the pulse is. And it's never right. And I don't understand how they can't get it right. These are pretty smart people after all.
Well, I mean, I think it used to be a lot more correct. And I think a lot of this methodology comes from, when it was easier to get a hold of people. They had landlines, people had stronger party affiliations, weren't so many independents. It's
a good point.
it's more difficult, I think. But man, you think that they could get on top of it. I on Facebook this week, I proposed that we put Andrew Yang in charge of a task force.
Andrew Yang.
Doesn't he seem like the guy that could get to the bottom of
I
it?
thought he was absolutely fascinating during the Democratic primary debates. He was one of the few guys I was like, I could see him pulling this out. He was fun to listen to.
Well, yeah, and he thinks about things in different ways. He would be the guy to crack that code. So, Nate Silver, if you're listening, you're out. Andrew Yang is in.
Jason has waved his hand, and it is now so.
Obviously, we're both a little bit disgruntled with the polls, but what the results showed was this just evenly divided nation. We're even in the. I hate that we have these red and blue states because even within those states, a ton of those states this time were like a point or two or less of margin. And the same as 2016. Trump won by this razor's edge in 2016, and he's going to lose by this razor's edge in 2020. And there really hasn't been that much movement either way, I don't think. It's just all on the margins, isn't it?
Yeah, we had such a record turnout for, I think it was a combination of mail-in and absentee ballots. It was over 100 million by the time we got to election night. And then we see the results where this election had the most votes cast out of any election in American history, even in the COVID era, where there was this a big assumption of how many people may not show up to the polls in and of themselves. And there were record numbers of people that showed up at the polls. So good on everyone for just getting up, getting out. There's certainly folks that Wolf Blitzer on CNN kind of was a little contentious of when people were saying, don't be afraid of COVID, go out to the polls. And he sort of took offense to that everyone should be afraid of COVID. But yet there was this big turnout, and good on us for doing that. I want to see that more. I want to see people come out and vote and execute their right that they inherently have as an American citizen. It's interesting on how Donald Trump received the most presidential votes in American history, except for one person, and that is Joseph Biden, who ended up having the most in American history. And it's just wonderful.
But the thing that sticks in my craw the most is after 4 years of watching him as president, more people voted for him the second time. That makes me worry about where a lot of Americans are with what they think is acceptable in the White House. But I do love the fact that many people came out. It was record turnout, and America needs more of that. We're a democracy. That is the agency that the common person has, is their vote.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jason. I think this election proved, if anything else, that it's extremely important to get out and vote. And to answer your question, I think America is divided on paper. I think we're actually a lot closer in being together than we really give ourselves credit for, even when we go in time periods of strife and contention, especially with each other due to political ideologies and where we lean on things and who we vote for and who we don't vote for. And this to me is just another great example of how the Electoral College is beneficial. It gives us a breathing process. It keeps the country in check. And I agree in the end that the states are probably closer to being purple than they are distinctly blue or distinctly red, especially when you break down the numbers as we did.
Yeah, it's tremendously close everywhere. And living in Oshkosh, it's literally there's a Trump house, then there's a Biden house, then there's a Trump house, there's a Biden house. Life goes on after the election. These people are still neighbors.
Absolutely.
I will say this, that as we were driving to the store today, I was noting who still has their yard signs up and who has them down. And I firmly believe that the holiday rule is in effect for political yard signs. It's done. Take them down. It's over. Now you're just being a sore winner or a sore loser.
Very good. Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. So, yeah, we're a divided country, but we have a president-elect, a projected president-elect. Midday Saturday, most of the major networks ended up putting Biden over the top. And that is where we stand now. What was your reaction to the result? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not exactly surprised how it went. I think if anybody listened to our last episode, they can get a real clear understanding as to why. I don't get so emotionally invested in presidential elections in general. I mean, I care about them because I am an American, but I don't get emotionally invested into it, so I'm not exactly real hurt or crying about it. I can totally understand why there's people on one side that find some of the results contentious, but I got to be honest with you. I also see why people on Biden's side who want to celebrate, they want to recognize the moment in various ways. And I'm okay with everybody's reactions so far because we got deadlines and we got a time period and it's got to be set. So regardless of who agrees or disagrees and the votes or this or that and legalities and lawsuits, we have dates and we have things that are set up for when we can finally just move on.
My reaction initially was not elation, and it still isn't elation. It's honestly relief. Just relief. I can't tell you how much Trump has weighed on the psyche of liberals. How much his presidency took us off guard, and then how much his presidency, for me personally, just let me down on so many basic human levels. So I am just glad that his days are numbered. I am a little sad that the Democrats didn't win control of the Senate, but at the same time, mostly just relieved. And I do think that things will hopefully come back to some more of a semblance of normal. And I know we disagree about Trump and his impact, but you just see other countries were lighting up fireworks like we had just won World War II.
Well, I don't know to that extent,
Well,
but
this is good.
there were celebrations. I agree with that, and that's okay.
I think this will improve our standing on the world stage. I think if we had 4 more years of him, I don't know. I'm just relieved. I'm just relieved.
The Republicans did very well down ticket, so Georgia's got a runoff election for 2 senators.
A lot of split tickets. Yeah.
And the Republicans made up some seats in the House. I believe, don't the Democrats might still have control of the House?
Democrats still have control, but I think they lost about 8
Yeah.
seats.
And then the Senate could potentially, how the Georgia runoff goes, that tilts the Senate one way or another. So there's some still things here to play out. And yes, right now
Nobody should be fooled. Those Georgia Senate races are going to go Republican, no matter how much the Democrats pour money in, and the polls look like maybe they won't.
I'm not going to prognosticate on the results of that. I think it'll be another close one, but if you were to put a gun to my head and tell me to make a decision right now, I would say, yeah, maybe Republican, but I think it's going to be close as everything else has been. So yes, Biden has been, according to the media, he's been projected the winner. And when that has happened, the results of that have typically never been reversed. There have been 4 elections in our country's history, only one where the Congress/Supreme Court essentially had to formally intervene. You have the elections of 1876, 1888, 1960, which is Kennedy and Nixon, and then the 2000 election with Gore and Bush. And that in 2000 was the only one that the Supreme Court/Congress formally intervened. So as we see it, I understand why Biden people are celebrating. I'm not even going to say that Trump is going to somehow reverse this. Legally, he can file lawsuits. He has a time period based on how the Electoral College system works and how everything is certified. And it's his legal right to do that. I don't think it's going to change anything. Let's just be honest here. But he has the right to do it. And the media doesn't declare the winner. There is a process here. And I have a few dates that I can run down as well, but I'll give you a second just to comment on that.
Well, what do you think of Trump not conceding?
Oh, I think he definitely should because it's part of our tradition.
Yeah. I think, I'd like to just spend a minute, I guess, talking about, we talked about our reactions, but then the candidates' reactions. Joe Biden, if he's got any sort of mandate at all, it's to heal us, to bring us together, to not be divisive. So he's trying to not be divisive, but at the same time, I don't know that Trump's ever going to concede. I think he's going to complain about this all the way to the end, and he'll leave, and our transition will be worse for it. Governance in America will be worse for it. And I just think that Trump, time and time again, he's presented with opportunities where he could be the bigger man, and we would all give him huge kudos for that, and it would do so much good, and he just can't. And I think that's why I'm relieved he's leaving, because I don't think he's ever had the interests of the full nation at heart. He's the first president I've ever felt like from the opposing party that treated Democrats as enemies, not fellow citizens.
In my mind, yeah, Trump should concede. Again, it's part of our tradition. Just to make clear, there is no law requiring a candidate to publicly concede.
No, it's just tradition.
Correct. And that goes back to 1896. William Jennings Bryan, he sent a short telegram to the opponent, the winner, William McKinley. So that's where the tradition comes from.
A classy telegram.
Yes. And I think Trump should do that. He has time, but it's not going to change anything. He does have an opportunity to come out with a little bit of a higher standing and a little graciousness.
Well, what do you think of these? He's got these allegations of, granted, okay, it's a tight election. It was a tight election in 2016. And he has every right to have recounts and try to get to the best possible vote count in these squeaker states. What he doesn't have he has the right to do anything, I guess, but what I want him to stop doing is to say things like rigged or people are cheating or things, because that hasn't been borne out. And we owe so much gratitude to the election workers, many of them just unpaid volunteers who worked countless hours to get this vote in while people were pressuring them from both sides. And, there are Democrat and Republican poll workers for each and every one of those mail-in ballots, matching signatures, concurring to let a ballot go through. And those people, that is what this country needs to be made of. Those local officials that don't let party get in the way of people. Man, I'm turning into Brett Sowie.
Yeah, it's the glow, it's the radiation leaking on you. There's definitely some things that he can do. There are some lawsuits that are starting to kind of pop up, but let's turn things around and keep things in perspective right now. There are ballots that are still being counted. So here are the dates everyone needs to kind of pay attention to and why. From November 4th to December 14th, this is when the votes are counted, the popular votes. That's called canvassing. Then during this time period, the states have to file certificates of assertment. That's basically certifying the votes. Now, December 8th is an important date because that's called the safe harbor deadline. And this is where states are required to resolve controversies at least 6 days before meeting of electors. That now brings us up to December 14th. That's the date that all the stuff has to be filed and handed in, and the electors in those states then cast their votes. Okay, it's usually the Monday after the second Wednesday in November of any presidential election year. Then January 6th, that's when the joint session of Congress to count the electoral votes and declare election results. January 6th, declaration of election results. And then finally, January 20th, presidential inauguration. So there are some time periods here for these lawsuits to go through. I don't think anything's going to come out of them because historically, when the winner that's projected to be presidential elect, that has never been reversed in our country's history. But here's the dates, here's some of the history, and let's go forward and see what happens.
Yeah, I think it's a bad sign when your lawyer thinks he booked the Four Seasons, but he booked a gardening center next to a porn shop and across the street from a crematorium.
Location.
For super sketchy part of town for that weird press conference where Giuliani was notified while he was on camera that it had been called for Biden. And he's like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And I know there's probably a lot of conservatives yelling at the radio saying, what are you talking about? These votes have to, all legal votes. And then there's liberals that are yelling at the radio, every vote counts.
But see, so the thing is though, like the cognitive dissonance of the Trump argument is that they're saying, and I saw this on, what late night person did this? They smashed these two, the Trump people in Philadelphia and the Trump people in Arizona. And one of them are chanting, stop the count, stop the count. And the other ones are saying, count the votes, count the votes. And I think the joke was they just like to say 3 words at a time. You can get them to say any 3 words, but it's
funny.
The dissonance of that is that I just want the same thing applied everywhere. And Trump, as usual, wants whatever is best for him to be applied. You can say that's a legal argument, but it's just, it reeks of hypocrisy.
Let's just wrap this up. Again, no law requiring for him to concede. Yes, he should, according to American tradition. And the lawsuits...
And Brett Sowie.
And the lawsuits he's allowed to do. But we ran down the dates. This is when it's got to be done by. And in all honesty, we both don't really think that that's going to change the projected results in the projected presidential-elect Joe Biden and projected Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yeah. Can we talk about Kamala Harris for a second?
Please do. Go right ahead.
Or for like 3 or 4 or 5
Oh, of course.
minutes.
Yeah, let's talk about her.
Let's talk about that white pantsuit. Holla. Oh, I loved it. So I said I was relieved about this election. The thing that is really stirring my heart is seeing the impact that Kamala Harris's election is having on all of my female friends and how great it is to finally have that representation. Female representation, minority representation. I just think she's going to be such a wonderful role model to so many people. So many little girls are going to be able to see themselves as something. The possibilities of little girls are opening up because of her. And it's just, it's high time. It's well overdue. But I was getting a little teary at the reaction, especially of my female friends, at the impact that has on them.
Up front, I don't agree with Ms. Harris's political ideologies and thoughts on policy, but from an historical and American standpoint, an important toll of the bell happened for us historically. And I think it's something that is very good going forward. It helps bring another wonderful aspect to our society, another patch on our patchwork quilt. And again, I don't agree with her politically, policy wise, but I do recognize how important that moment is for a lot of women and people of color. And I think it's important, regardless of political affiliation, we recognize that, acknowledge that, celebrate that. Doesn't mean we have to agree, but we do all those three things because we're Americans. And in all honesty, it's a respectful damn thing to do.
Yeah, I mean the peaceful transition of power, democracy demands that there are people that are disagreeing that are agreeing to compromise. I mean that's it. That's the system. I'm elated that she's in, and I'm going to make the prediction right now that Biden is a one-term president, and in 2024, if he's not locked up, it's going to be Trump-Harris in a rematch.
Wow. I thought we weren't going to do pronostications.
You heard it here first.
The only prediction that I have for that is I see a high potentiality for Biden to be a one-term president. I'm going to take that one step further and refine that handshake bet down. I think the potential is there for Biden to not even get through his first term. I see about a year and a half in. Something can happen with his health or in general along those lines, and he might have to step down.
Oh, he's not that old and
No,
frail.
I'm just throwing it out there as just something interesting to think about. And, he is the oldest president we've ever elected. So
True, but I and in that regard, the vice president is supposed to be able to step in and make everybody
Yep.
feel comfortable that they'd be ready on
Yeah.
day one. And I have no fear at all that if something happened, that Kamala would be able to step in and take the reins effectively.
sure. And I can see that Biden-Harris ticket only lasting one term, going to another election. Harris will run then for president. But I'm going to be honest with you. We can get into this in a later episode. Trump's not going in again. He shouldn't go in again. Walk away.
Oh, I agree, but I just don't. I feel like something tells me. Something tells me.
We'll have an interesting conversation about Trump's lasting influence on the political landscape going forward, because down ticket, the Republicans did very well. Trump did not hurt the Republicans in large part when it came to the House and Senate votes. He didn't win the presidential election, which makes it a little interesting just to kind of think about that tidbit for election, that the Republicans did really good, but Trump didn't win. And
But I could tell, anecdotally, I could tell that, you see a lot of Biden Trump signs, but then you also see a lot, there's the state and local races. And so there's the state senators and the treasurers, and you can see who's on what side of the political line, because usually there's the Biden, and then there's the three other ones that you see with Biden, and there's Trump, and there's the three other ones you see with Trump. But there were a lot of houses that would have the three other ones that you would see with Trump, but not Trump. And I think that's exactly what happened.
Maybe the Lincoln Project had something to do with it. Your buddies over there.
I love those guys. Democrats need to take some lessons in fighting Republicans from the Lincoln Project.
And I'm going to say Republicans need to take a lot of lessons of how to deal with Democrats in elections as well. But that's a discussion, buddy, for another day. Well, let's not go down that rabbit trail right now, but touche.
I think it's a rabbit hole.
Rabbit trail. So with all that said, Jason, let me ask you this. How do you think the media has treated the election thus far? And do you think going forward after the inauguration, is the media going to be holding Biden as accountable as they've been trying to do with Trump the last 3.5+ years?
I think that's a specious question, argument, whatever. I think that it's not a question of holding somebody accountable. It's a question of reporting on untoward action or just crazy nonsense conspiracy stuff that comes out of Trump's mouth. I don't think we're going to get that from Biden. So it'll just be much more policy focused, where it should be. Like, the government stuff should be policy focused, and we can have agreements or disagreements on who's telling the most truth about those things without having to worry about somebody's personality. If you want to talk about, and you brought this up last time, 2 times ago, with the number of negative articles on Trump and versus, was it Obama was the article?
Yeah, the first 100 days comparison where about 98, 96% were negative to Trump versus the 60% positive to Obama.
I just think that it goes back to Trump being such a negative personality and Obama being such a hopeful personality, I think that negativity, it begets, you get what you put out there.
Trump brings it on himself, essentially.
Well, he's
also is what you're
constantly,
saying.
he's constantly looking for a fight. He's constantly
That's
looking
valid.
for a foil. And so I think that there just won't be the amount of it, and there won't be the constant like hand wringing of the media at how do we cover somebody who is obviously lying, and how he was just such a strange beast for the media to cover. And so I think that the media should just revert back to the norm, I would hope. I don't know. I'm hoping a lot in just sort of the policy sense, and the noise coming out of Washington, D.C. reverts back to a much quieter baseline. But I don't know. I don't feel the media, I guess, is as biased as you feel the media is biased. You asked the question of me, so I will ask it of you. What do you think of the media treatment of Trump v. Biden?
I think it's very valid that there's been a media bias against Trump. Studies have come out and backed that pretty much up. And in terms of I think the lying that you mentioned with Trump, I think a lot of that comes from news analysis, and a lot of that is politically motivated. So for a lot of voters, and there was 70 some plus
You're
million,
right. His lies are politically
where they
motivated.
do like how Trump sort of challenges the media. They kind of feel like Trump is saying something that they wish that they could say. And
But
Trump
again,
is,
that's Trump.
Yeah.
That's Trump making an enemy of the media.
and Trump has not always handled it spectacularly. But I think there's a lot of segment out there that says, "Man, I liked how he talks to everybody." The typical Trump sort of
How
voice.
can they like that?
I'm just telling
Do
you.
you like that? Is that why you like him?
No, I do like how he does it in moments, and I wish he would pick those moments better, where I appreciate what he's trying to do. But in terms of a blanket way of personality and dealing with things on a daily basis, it's not going to get you anywhere, because all you're going to do is give people fodder. And so I think the media will be a little bit easier on Biden, especially in the minds of conservatives and people right of center. I think that's already starting to happen now with how they think certain things aren't being looked at, and saying that Biden is already the presidential elect, and they have those opinions going both ways.
Well, I mean, he is. In any other year, the other candidate
But
would have
here's the
conceded
thing-
by now.
But here's the thing that conservatives aren't really taking into account, and especially when you were to ask them, is the media biased? Are they more left leaning? And they would say yes. So then are you going to be really surprised when the media is going to, in your mind, be easier on Biden? I think the policy thing, where it gets back to policy and it gets back to issue and it gets back to things that we all really need to get done and get solved and start moving on. I agree. That has to happen, and it will happen. And it's also part of Biden's temperament. And
Do you think we'll get stimulus in the lame duck?
to go on a limb, yeah, I think they will. I think once this is done, they're going to get to work, and I think something will be passed before January 20th.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would hope that it doesn't have to wait for the new Congress. I think it's politically beneficial to both parties to do it, and it's necessary for the country. I just think we're going to have this rogue, as unpredictable as Trump has been heretofore. I feel like a defeated Trump with a couple of months left is going to be very unpredictable. Like, is he going to care about the coronavirus? Are we going to have to wait until January to
I don't think he's going to be that petty, dude.
Well,
That would leave such a sour taste in people's mouths that are so inherently behind him. It would have to be the bigger man here. Walk out with your head
hope
held
so, but
high.
if you could
It'd
show
be-
me
it'd be
one, if you
disgusting.
could show me one time he's been the bigger, better man, I would cling to that example. But he only seems to have one way of reacting.
Yeah, so to close it up, I think the media is going to be perceived by conservatives as being easier on Biden. They've been so hard on Trump these years. So, yeah, I think going forward, it's just important that we start getting back to more of a unifying tone, and everyone's trying to do that right now. But, man, it's going to be hard for people with the way they feel like they've been treated for 3.5 years. Conservatives feel like they've been treated horribly. Liberals feel like that they've been blamed for certain things like rioting and looting, and I think that everyone needs to start being an adult, grow up. If anything, over the last 4 years have taught us is we need to be more mature and responsible in how we deal and talk to each other and work out through these problems, and not just go and throw temper tantrums and have autistic screeching in the middle of the aisle because you're not getting what you want.
Yeah, it's time to come together. It's time to realize that our differences are smaller than what we have in common. America needs it. If it doesn't, I have a lot of worry, because we're so evenly divided that if one side can't reconcile the fact that the other side is also American, and not going anywhere. We have to stop being enemies. We have to start being patriots. We have to start disagreeing without coming to blows or hatred. We can have problems with ideas or ideologies. We shouldn't try to have problems with our neighbors personally because they believe something different. I am heartened by the fact that even through this contentious election here in sort of ground zero 50-50 land, everybody's fine. I went out, took the dog for a walk after I voted, and I saw a guy in a red Trump hat, and he was sitting on the bench. My dog went over and said hi to him. He's a nice dog. I was like, hey, thanks. We shared a pleasantry. On the way back in the same walk, my dog stopped and was very interested in a yard of another neighbor. And he came out and he was like, hey, how's it going? I was like, yeah, it's good. And he's like, oh, I just had a deer there. And that's why she wants that. And I was like, oh, come away. And he had the Republican signs up in his yard, but we just had a nice interaction. And I'm a hippie looking guy with long hair. So I don't think things are as bad as the picture sometimes people want to paint, and the picture that sometimes people see conflating, oh my God, all these Republicans are people in long guns going to state houses, and all liberals are occupying blocks of Portland. It's such a small fringe on both sides, and we allow them so much space in the argument that hopefully we can have at least a little bit of time where moderation and consideration and niceness can prevail.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head as you're saying that because that's exactly how I would describe it. A lot of the stereotypes that each side sort of has about the other are sort of the minority fringes that it's the reason that it looks like that is because they're doing more things out in the open, and they're also being the loudest in this conversation.
Well, and everybody has a phone to record things now.
Yeah, and the news doesn't really help in contributing to that either. And I think a lot of people on
No,
both
because
sides,
the news has a profit motive. It's no longer,
it's
like
part of their
it's-
business model.
It's no longer a loss
It's-
leader. So it has to make money. And if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, it's part of their business model. So that's the people really on both sides of the political aisle. The majority of us are actually closer together than we give ourselves credit for. And I think that just goes to how you're influenced and what people choose to listen to, and sort of being in that echo chamber. Both sides do it. And then it sort of builds up a resentment. I'm hoping that people maybe going forward, they're going to be a little bit more analytical about their particular party. I think if anything we should take away is sometimes we need to worry less about what's going on the other side of the fence and worry about mowing our lawn first without worrying about the neighbor's lawn. And I hope going forward we can do that. I don't know. I think this is just really good stuff in terms of our growth as our country and us as a citizenry, because we're in this position where we're allowed to improve, and it's not easy. There's going to be stumbling blocks, and we're going to disagree on things. All of us are. It's how we deal with those disagreements. Think about this. The most votes in an election ever. People were boarding up businesses every which way, thinking that there was going to be riots. We can have a discussion about who those riots may have been for.
But it was so peaceful.
But everything was fine, and I think
thank God.
and I think it's maybe because Biden has been projected to be the winner, and there was no reason to, because if it was Trump, I think it would be the opposite. But there wasn't, and I think that's good. And I think sometimes we just need to blow off a little steam, as terrible as some of that releasing of steam can be, and I disagree with. But as a country, we are stronger and more unified than we give ourselves credit for again.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. And now I'm wondering if we can get down to the meat bet.
Sure. Is there any other things that you want to touch on here before we move on to the meat bit?
Well, I wouldn't have brought it up if there were.
Okay, man. I just want to make sure you get a say.
No,
And there's things that I wish that I would probably remember going back and re-listening to the show that just say something about what's happening and what's going to go forward. But I'm not perfect. I don't remember everything on the spot. And one thing just to close up is that's the thing when you're listening to this show, if you're conservative or a liberal and you're like, I wish that guy would make that point. And there are times where that happens for us, and we keep it friendly and we keep it light. And that's why this meat bet is kind of a fun thing to talk about.
Yeah, let's get to the meat bet now.
Let's break down the numbers here. Let's get the piece of paper.
Yeah, I got it in front of me as well.
Okay.
So the meat bet, for everybody who may not remember or have heard the last episode, we did the election map breakdown, and we came up with our electoral total. And whoever was closest to the electoral total of the winner is the winner of the meat bet, and then the loser has to buy the meat.
Correct.
And so, what were the numbers? What were our meat bet numbers?
So here we go. Jason had Biden winning 335 electoral votes versus Trump's 203. I had for Biden 271, Trump 260. I said the election was going to be very close. You said we will be a wait and see kind of thing, and it's going to be a process. And I think all those things have borne out. It's a lot closer election than anybody gave it credit for. Current tally as we stand, as of the recording of this show, Biden 290 electoral votes versus Trump's 214.
The meat bet all comes down to Georgia.
Yeah, it really does. And that's
our meat bet is as close as the election. We can't resolve this meat bet until Georgia certifies, because here's the thing. Right now, if Georgia certifies and Biden gets 306, then I am closer to the total. If Trump wins Georgia, you are closer to the total. So it's a nail biter.
It really is. It totally is a nail biter. And I'm already knowing what I kind of cut a steak. I want to make you buy me.
You really think Georgia's going to find the votes to change it back to red? I mean, it's razor tight. Last I looked, the difference is like 7,500. I'm asking you if you seriously think that will be surmounted by Trump, or do you just want to concede the meat bet right now?
No, I want to wait and see. I want to wait and see how Georgia comes out. And
as you should. You should take every avenue open to you. Just don't call it rigged. That's all I'm asking.
Nope, not going to say that. I'm going to let the legal process bear anything out if there's anything there. And
we want all properly cast votes counted so that we can get to the bottom
that's the
of
big
the meat
argument.
bet.
That's the big argument of why people are having a problem with what Trump's been saying, because you don't want people, especially the electorate, to lose confidence in their election. And that's,
but
you
the
don't
ones
want to do
undermining the confidence are the ones.
you know what? We can go round and round as far as that goes.
And we already had like a nice reconciliatory moment, so let's not ruin it. This is how
I'm not trying to ruin it. I'm just making an anecdotal kind of quote here.
This is how our relationship works. We go from being at each other's throats to having like patriotic, bro-ish agreement to immediately being back at each other's throats.
We're not at each other's throats. It's hyperbole.
We try to usually wrap it up with the feel-good stuff. And then Brett always slides something in at the last second, and I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah.
So
that's all right. It's fine.
That's why
scream at me through the speakers, guys. Go right ahead.
That's why it's disagree to disagree.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, we got a good meat bet.
We got a good meat bet.
Come on, Georgia.
Yeah.
I want that ribeye.
Yeah. And if you want to weigh in on the meat bet, hit us up on social media. We're at the D2D podcast. That's the D2D podcast, numerical 2, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
And don't forget to listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Rate, like, subscribe, share, retweet. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody you know about us. And to everyone who's already been doing that, thank you. We appreciate your support.
Our yard signs will be coming soon.
I can't wait for the t-shirts.
I want a hat.
You want a hat? I want a t-shirt and a coffee mug. That's what I want.
Oh, we're dreaming of merch for Christmas, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, let's call it a show. It's been a
wonderful conversation, Jason. Thank you for your time. Learned a lot.
Yeah. Likewise, buddy. We'll have to do it again sometime.
I think we will next week.
All right, Brad. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Jason.